Scott, thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Now, your company is currently enrolling for phase 1 and phase 1/2 trials for Niemann-Pick disease, which is a rare genetic disease. Tell us about the disease, current treatment options, and the potential for the treatment you're developing.
Sure, Dave. So you're correct. We're enrolling in the United States in a phase 1, and we're enrolling in Europe in a phase 1/2 clinical trial. We're about to complete the enrollment of those trials. Niemann-Pick Type C is an overexpression of cholesterol in cells. It affects every cell in the body, so that when a person is diagnosed with this disease, this cholesterol, as you might imagine, can do considerable damage to organs as well as to the brain in the body. Current treatments, there is nothing approved in the United States. There's a single drug approved in Europe called miglustat, which treats some of the neurological benefits of the disease. That drug is also used off-label in the United States by families here, but currently there is nothing approved in the United States at this point in time.
And as I understand it, about 1 in every 100,000 people are affected with this disease. It can happen at any stage in life, but typically very early, before 2 years old, correct?
That's correct. However, it's interesting with genetic testing and with the prevalence of so many folks paying attention to this disease currently, we're seeing later onset patients as well. People that had been diagnosed with psychiatric ailments, if you will, are later being diagnosed as Niemann-Pick patients in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, actually.
In this disease, does it affect every organ of the body? I know it does affect the liver, but does it affect other organs?
It's a good question, Dave. It actually affects every cell in the body. So yes, every organ, every mechanism, every cell in the body are affected by the disease.
Now, how do the patients in the U.S. cope now with the disease? Are there any treatment approaches available today that actually work?
There's miglustat that's approved in Europe that was not approved in the United States for the treatment of the disease. So truly there is not. It's a completely unmet medical need in the United States. And frankly, in our view, in spite of miglustat being in the marketplace, miglustat has its own set of side effects that in many instances, the families, the caregivers, and the patients opt to not stay on miglustat because of those side effects.
And you have already received some data from your trials. So why don't you tell us about some of the data that you've reported?
So we've actually reported preliminary data showing very good results with respect to the fact that not only are we seeing cholesterol being lifted out of cells using our drug Trappsol Cyclo, but we've also, through our testing, we have seen that our drug, although given intravenously, is getting through the blood-brain barrier and is in the brain, which gives us the benefit from the standpoint of our delivery through IV of treating the entire body, not just treating one segment of the body. And it's rather unique because the molecule, our cyclodextrin of Trappsol Cyclo, is a rather large molecule, and you would theoretically not see that get through the blood-brain barrier.
You also have a compassionate study for the treatment of a single Alzheimer's patient. Talk to us about that program.
Sure. So a little over a year ago, we were approached by a very large family group that had looked at the profile of our company and looked at the profile and the safety profile of our drug. And they approached us with a prominent physician researcher, Dr. Diana Kerwin, with the theory and idea of setting up this single patient, late onset geriatric compassionate use IND. We wrote the protocol, submitted it to FDA, and it was approved. And I'll note, and the funding for this program was completely sourced by the family that sponsored the program. And the program has just completed its annual review, submitted an annual report to the FDA with the intent that the physician and the family wish to continue utilizing our drug for the treatment of the patient through the following year, through an expanded access program. The result being is that we actually saw good results and positive results, such so that the company has already made a determination that we will be moving into a clinical trial program, and we're exploring that right now. And equally as important, our scientific advisory board has also looked at the data, and in fact, Dr. Flint Beal of Cornell one of the prominent researchers in Alzheimer's and dementia, who has actually written a paper utilizing cyclodextrins in a mouse model, has joined our scientific advisory board, and we're in discussions with he and Cornell and other institutions about possible clinical trial sites for a clinical trial. And a question you might want to ask as a follow-on, Dave, from an asset standpoint as a company, we believe we have a strong asset in our clinical phase Niemann-Pick program, but we also believe we've got a clinical asset in Alzheimer's as well at this point.
Now, looking at the big picture, what's the essential value proposition? Why should investors take an interest today?
Well, Cyclo has a long history, first in Niemann-Pick Type C, Dave, of having its drug used compassionately since, for over a decade. And we've got all of this data. In fact, all of that data that's real and has been published and is in somewhat in the public domain is the data that we utilize to put in front of regulators, not only in the United States with the FDA, but also in Europe, as well as in Israel, where we have 2 clinical trial sites. So, we believe we've got an efficacious treatment for Niemann-Pick Type C. With the utilization of our drug and compound in this late-onset geriatric patient for Alzheimer's, and seeing the positive nature of those results, we also feel that there's an expanded program here for us to expand out our platform with the building of those 2 assets. And frankly, based upon our current valuation and the utilization of these 2 assets and the possibility of other assets that we can develop around our program, we frankly feel we're extremely undervalued from a comparable basis.
I also want to add that you have a fantastic board of directors, with the CEO of US Pharmacia having put in $5 million. You have the past president of Colgate-Palmolive and other very important people that have invested heavily. I think you've invested overall, about $20 million so far in this technology?
So you're right, Dave. So we've got Patrick Astronic from US Pharmacia. We've got Marcus Seeger, who's our lead director. Marcus is the CEO of Pol Pharma, which is based in Warsaw, Poland, a very large biosimilar generics company, a deep bench in science and deep bench in drug development. We have Bill Shanahan, the former president of Colgate, as you've mentioned. And I'll say that, this board is very active. I speak to them almost on a weekly basis. In many instances, Marcus in particular, I speak to him almost on a bi-daily basis. I'll also mention our scientific advisory board, which is co-chaired by Rita Cowell. So it's a very prestigious group of individuals, but there are people that are very involved. And as you mentioned, every one of these outside directors has invested. And in fact, just prior to this last financing we did with the help of Think Equity, we have frankly self-funded the company through my family office and through the board and through friends and family, raising $20 million. And you're correct, US Pharmacia is our largest investor with just under $5 million at this point.
And right, and you mentioned you recently closed a placement for more than $7 million. How far does that money take your development work?
So we raised $7.4 million through Think Equity, and I compliment those guys. They did what they said they would do. I'll also note that of the $7.4 million, $700,000+ again came from our board of directors as well. So we participated in the deal as well most recently. This capital will give us ample runway to complete the phase 1/2 trials and get clinical readout, which will be very important milestones for us for the marketplace and more importantly, Dave, for the patients.
To recap, Scott, what's the main takeaway for investors?
Well, I want to be clear, and we're capitalists, Dave. We're looking to make money, but, our key focus is trying to help these patients and these families, not only with respect to NPC, which is a terrible, terrible, debilitating disease seen again prevalently in young people and in babies, but also in Alzheimer's. And we believe that we are at the precipice of being able to help them, this unmet medical need. So the opportunity is, one, helping these families and doing a very good thing for mankind, frankly. But at the end of the day, we think the addressable market for NPC alone is $500 million. So, with that, we believe that if we can obtain a portion of that market, we believe that the multiple that could be achieved on our company based upon our margin, which we're not going to disclose at this point in time, that our valuation proposition is such that our company is extremely undervalued. And I'll also note, Dave, that between now and the end of the year, we will be releasing some very interesting and positive news that we think will help the marketplace further understand the value proposition of our company.
Excellent. Scott, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Dave. Thanks for having me, sir.